She gave her last dollar to a man in rags. He returned in a private jet and changed her life. The autumn rain had been falling steadily for 3 days in Cedar Falls, Nebraska, turning the small town's main street into a river of mud and memories. Sarah Mitchell pressed her forehead against the cool window of Mabel's diner, watching the water cascade down the glass like tears she'd learned not to shed in public. At 32, she had perfected the art of carrying heartbreak with a smile, of serving coffee with hands that trembled not from caffeine, but from the constant worry that had become her closest companion. The diner had been her second home for 6 years now, ever since Michael's accident at the grain elevator had left her a widow with an 8-year-old daughter and a mountain of medical debt that seemed to grow taller each month. The yellow Formica counters and red vinyl booths had witnessed more of her life than any church confessional. The late-night tears when she thought no one was looking, the quiet celebrations when Emma brought home good grades, the countless prayers whispered between orders for more coffee and apple pie. Tonight, like most Tuesday nights, the dinner rush had been more of a dinner trickle. Cedar Falls wasn't the thriving agricultural hub it had been in her grandmother's day. Young people left for Lincoln or Omaha, seeking opportunities that small-town Nebraska couldn't provide. The remaining population consisted mainly of retirees, farmers hanging on to family land, and people like Sarah, those who stayed not by choice but by circumstance. She counted the crumpled bills in her apron pocket for the 3rd time that evening. $18 in tips, plus her hourly wage of $8.50 minus taxes. After rent, utilities, groceries, and Emma's school needs, there would be nothing left as usual. Tomorrow she'd have to choose between buying Emma new sneakers, the girl had outgrown her current pair months ago, or putting gas in their 15-year-old Honda Civic. It was always a choice between necessities, never a choice between wants. The bell above the diner door chimed, interrupting her mental calculations. Sarah straightened automatically, her customer service smile sliding into place like a familiar mask. But the figure that shuffled through the door made her pause. He was tall, probably in his early 60s, but hunched over as if carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. His clothes, if they could still be called that, hung in tatters from his thin frame. A once blue jacket, now faded to gray and torn at both elbows, barely protected him from the rain. His gray hair hung in matted strands around a face weathered by sun and hardship, and his shoes, Sarah's heart clenched when she saw his shoes, were held together with duct tape and hope. But it was his eyes that struck her most. Despite his bedraggled appearance, despite the way he hesitated just inside the door as if expecting to be turned away, his eyes were clear and intelligent, holding a depth that seemed at odds with his circumstances. They were the eyes of someone who had seen much, perhaps lost much, but had not yet given up on finding something worth believing in. "Evening," Sarah called out, her voice carrying genuine warmth despite her exhaustion. "Come on in out of that rain. Lord knows it's cold enough to freeze the devil himself tonight." The man stood frozen in the doorway, water dripping from his tattered jacket onto the worn linoleum. His gaze swept the nearly empty diner. Frank Turner sat in his usual corner booth, working on his 3rd cup of coffee and 2nd piece of cherry, while elderly Mrs. Henderson picked at a tuna melt near the window, before settling on Sarah's kind face. "I'm not sure I should be in here, miss," he said quietly, and Sarah was surprised by his voice. Despite his appearance, he spoke with careful diction, as if each word was chosen deliberately. There was an educated quality to his tone that didn't match the assumptions most people would make based on his appearance. "Everyone deserves a warm place on a night like this," Sarah replied, already reaching for a clean coffee mug. The ceramic was chipped along the rim. Everything in Mabel's diner bore the scars of decades of use. But it was clean and would hold heat. "Coffee's fresh, and I've got apple pie that's calling your name." She watched as the man made his way, carefully between the tables, his movements deliberate and cautious. When he slid into the farthest corner booth, the one tucked away from the main dining area, Sarah noticed how he positioned himself to have a clear view of both the door and the kitchen. It was the behavior of someone accustomed to being unwelcome, someone who had learned to plan escape routes. Sarah approached with the steaming mug, setting it down gently on the scratched Formica table. The man wrapped his weathered hands around it as if it were the most precious thing he'd ever held, and she saw his shoulders relax slightly as the warmth seeped through his fingers. "What can I get you to eat?" she asked, pulling out her order pad, though she already suspected what the answer would be. The man's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I appreciate the kindness, truly I do, but I'm afraid I find myself in a position where I can't." He trailed off, shame coloring his weathered features. Pride, Sarah realized, was sometimes the heaviest burden of all. She set down her pad and really looked at him. Past the torn clothes and unkempt appearance, past the assumptions that society would make, and saw what she recognized from her own mirror on too many mornings: dignity fighting a losing battle against circumstances beyond one's control. "You know what?" she said, her voice taking on the tone she used when Emma was upset about something at school. "I was just thinking about how much food we're going to have to throw out tonight. Mabel made way too much meatloaf, and these mashed potatoes are going to go bad if someone doesn't eat them soon." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Would you be doing me a favor by helping me out with this? I hate seeing good food go to waste. And frankly, I'll probably get in trouble with Mabel if she sees how much we're throwing away." The lie came easily because it served a greater truth. Sarah had learned long ago that sometimes kindness required creativity, that preserving someone's dignity mattered as much as filling their stomach. The man's throat worked silently for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "That's very kind of you, Miss Sarah Mitchell. And like I said, it's not kindness. It's just practical thinking." As Sarah made her way to the kitchen, she caught the man watching her in the reflection of the rain-streaked window. There was something in his gaze, an intensity that was both curious and evaluative, as if he were trying to solve a complex equation, and she was the variable he couldn't quite figure out. She returned with a plate heaped with more food than they typically served: thick slices of meatloaf still steaming from the grill, a generous helping of mashed potatoes with a pat of butter melting into a golden pool, green beans that were actually fresh rather than canned, and 2 warm dinner rolls with honey butter on the side. "This looks like a feast," the man said softly, and again Sarah caught that note of refinement in his voice, as if he were accustomed to evaluating meals that had been prepared with care. "Mabel's a good cook," Sarah replied, sliding into the booth across from him without really thinking about it. It was past 9 o'clock, the diner was nearly empty, and something about this man made her want to sit and talk rather than busy herself with unnecessary cleaning. "She's been feeding this town for 40 years. Taught me everything I know about making people feel at home." The man ate with careful manners, cutting his meat into precise pieces and chewing thoughtfully. His table etiquette spoke of a different life, a different set of circumstances, though Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on what made her think so. "You have a daughter," he said after a few bites, and Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you—" He nodded toward her apron pocket where the corner of a school photograph was visible. "She's beautiful. Looks like her mother." Sarah pulled out the wallet-sized photo of Emma, taken just a few months earlier for the school yearbook. Her daughter's gap-toothed grin and bright eyes seemed to light up even the faded colors of the EO. "Cheap school photography." "Emma," Sarah said, her voice soft with the love that always colored it when she spoke of her daughter. "She's 8, smart as a whip, and has more questions than there are stars in the sky. Wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up because she says animals need doctors too." "She sounds remarkable," the man said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. "It must be challenging raising her on your own." Sarah's defenses rose automatically. She'd heard that tone before, usually followed by judgment or unwanted advice. But something in the man's eyes stopped her from giving her usual polite deflection. "It is," she admitted quietly. "But she's worth every struggle, every sleepless night, every choice between what I want and what she needs. She's the reason I get up in the morning and the reason I keep going when everything feels impossible." They talked as the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows. The man asked thoughtful questions about Emma's school, about Sarah's dreams for the future, about life in Cedar Falls. He listened with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly unnerving, as if every word she spoke was being carefully catalogued and considered. In return, he shared stories that painted pictures of a life that had included travel to places Sarah had only read about in the magazines that customers sometimes left behind. He spoke of cities and countries with the familiarity of someone who had walked their streets, of cultures and cuisines with the knowledge of someone who had experienced them firsthand. Yet he never quite explained how he had come to be here now in his current circumstances. "You've seen a lot of the world," Sarah observed as he described the night markets of Bangkok with vivid detail. "I have," he agreed. "But you know what I've learned in all my travels, Sarah Mitchell?" She shook her head, waiting. "The most beautiful things in life aren't the monuments or the museums or the five-star restaurants. They're moments like this, two strangers sharing a meal and genuine conversation. They're the kindness that people show each other when they have no reason to, when there's nothing to be gained except the satisfaction of doing what's right." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the compliment, but also sensed a deeper meaning in his words, as if he were speaking from recent experience rather than abstract philosophy. As the evening grew later and Sarah began her closing routine, the man finished his meal and sat back with obvious contentment. The color had returned to his cheeks and some of the tension had left his shoulders. "I can't remember the last time I enjoyed a meal so much," he said. "Not just the food, though it was excellent, but the company, the conversation, the simple, human dignity of being welcomed rather than merely tolerated." Sarah began clearing his plate, waving away his attempts to help. "That's what Mabel always taught me. We're not just serving food here, we're serving hope. Sometimes people need nourishment for their souls as much as their stomachs." The man reached into his jacket pocket with obvious reluctance, his movements careful and deliberate. "I need to be honest with you, Sarah. I don't have money to pay for this meal. I know you said it was going to waste anyway, but I also know that kindness doesn't pay your bills or feed your daughter." Sarah's heart clenched, not with annoyance or regret, but with recognition. She had been in situations where pride warred with necessity, where accepting help felt like admitting defeat. She understood the courage it took for him to admit his circumstances. "I told you that food was going to be thrown away," she said firmly. "You don't owe me anything for preventing waste. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity," the man said, and there was something profound in the way he spoke those words, as if they represented a fundamental principle by which he lived his life. "You've given me more than food tonight, Sarah. You've given me hope that kindness still exists in the world." As he prepared to leave, gathering his tattered jacket around him like armor against the world's indifference, Sarah made a decision that would have seemed foolish to any outside observer. She reached into her apron pocket, passed the $18 in tips, and pulled out a $20 bill from the small emergency fund she kept hidden in her wallet. It was money she had been saving for Emma's birthday, money that represented weeks of careful budgeting and small sacrifices. "Wait," she called as he reached for the door handle. "Please take this." The man turned, his eyes widening as he saw the $20 bill in her outstretched hand. "Sarah, I can't—" "It's getting colder tonight," she interrupted, pressing the money toward him. "Find somewhere warm to stay, a motel room, or at least somewhere dry. I'll worry about you out there in this weather. You can't afford to give me this," he said quietly, but his eyes were fixed on her face rather than the money, as if he were memorizing every detail of the moment. "It's just $20, Sarah said, though they both knew it represented much more for someone in her position. "Please, take it. For my peace of mind, if nothing else." Slowly, almost reverently, the man reached out and accepted the bill. His fingers, Sarah noticed they were cleaner than she would have expected, with neatly trimmed nails despite his overall appearance, brushed against hers as he took the money. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, and the way he spoke her name sounded like a benediction. "May I ask you something?" She nodded, suddenly feeling as if this moment was more significant than she understood. "Why? You don't know me. You owe me nothing. You have your own struggles, your own family to care for. Why show such kindness to a complete stranger?" Sarah considered his question seriously. understanding somehow that her answer mattered more than polite conversation. "I guess it's because we're all just people trying to make it through each day," she said finally. "Today I'm in a position to help. Tomorrow maybe I'll be the one who needs help. My grandmother used to say that kindness is like seeds. You plant them not knowing if they'll grow, but trusting that somehow, somewhere, they'll make the world a little better." The man smiled then, and for just a moment, the weariness and hardship seemed to lift entirely from his features. In that smile, Sarah caught a glimpse of who he might have been before whatever circumstances had brought him to her diner on this rainy night. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," he said, "and she raised a remarkable granddaughter." "She tried her best," Sarah replied, "said the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they're willing to share when they don't have much to begin with." The man stood silently for a long moment, the $20 bill held carefully in his weathered hands. When he looked up at Sarah again, his eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'll remember this night, Sarah Mitchell. I'll remember your kindness, your dignity, the way you treated a stranger like family. And I promise you, kindness like yours doesn't go unnoticed. It doesn't go unrewarded, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually it all comes around." With that, he pulled his tattered jacket tighter around his shoulders and stepped out into the rain. Sarah watched through the window as he walked slowly down Main Street, his figure gradually disappearing into the darkness and the steadily falling rain. After he left, Sarah finished her closing duties with mechanical precision, her mind replaying the evening's conversation. There had been something different about him, something that didn't quite fit the assumptions his appearance would normally inspire. The way he spoke, the questions he asked, the intensity with which he listened. It all suggested depths that she hadn't had time to explore. She locked up the diner and drove home through the rain to the small apartment she shared with Emma. The building was old, the stairs creaked, and the walls were thin enough that she could hear Mrs. Patterson's television through the bedroom wall. But it was home, and it was theirs, and that was enough. Emma was asleep in her bed, surrounded by library books about animals and a stuffed dog that had been her constant companion since her father's death. Sarah adjusted the covers around her daughter's shoulders and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of children's shampoo and innocence. In the kitchen, she opened the coffee can where she kept their savings, mostly coins and small bills accumulated. Through careful budgeting and minor miracles, she counted out $23 total, $3 less than she'd started the day with. Emma's birthday was still 2 weeks away, and now the small gift Sarah had planned would have to wait. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the rain against her window and Emma's peaceful breathing from the next room, Sarah didn't regret her decision. Her grandmother had been right about kindness being like seeds. You planted them in faith, trusting that somehow they would grow into something beautiful, even if you never got to see the harvest. Spring arrived in Cedar Falls with the typical Nebraska drama. One day snow, the next day 70 degrees and sunny. Sarah had always loved this time of year, when the world seemed to shake off winter's grip and remember how to hope again. The trees along Main Street budded with tender green leaves, and the farmers began their annual ritual of preparing fields for another season of faith in uncertain weather and fluctuating grain prices. 3 months had passed since that rainy night at the diner, and life had settled back into its familiar rhythm. Sarah worked her double shifts, Emma excelled in 3rd grade, and the bills got paid through a combination of determination, careful budgeting, and what Sarah privately thought of as divine intervention. The encounter with the mysterious stranger had faded into memory, filed away with other moments of human connection that had brightened an otherwise ordinary day. Emma had celebrated her 9th birthday with a small party at the diner, where Mabel had surprised her with a cake shaped like a puppy, and all the regular customers had sung happy birthday with enthusiasm that made up for any lack of musical talent. Sarah had managed to buy her daughter the art supplies she'd been wanting, along with a book about marine biology that Emma had devoured in 2 days. "Mama, did you know that dolphins have names for each other?" Emma had announced over breakfast, one morning, her face animated with the joy of new knowledge. They use special whistle sounds like we use words. Isn't that amazing? It is amazing, sweetheart, Sarah had replied, marveling as always at her daughter's capacity for wonder. What else did you learn? And Emma had launched into an elaborate explanation of dolphin communication that lasted through breakfast and the walk to school. These were the moments Sarah treasured, her daughter's bright curiosity, her endless questions, her assumption that the world was full of marvels waiting to be discovered. Work at the diner continued with its predictable cadence. The morning regulars arrived for coffee and gossip. The lunch crowd rushed through their meals with one eye on the clock, and the evening diners lingered over pie and conversations about weather, crops, and the gradual changes that time brought to small-town life. Frank Turner still occupied his corner booth most evenings, working through his grief over his wife's death by maintaining routines that gave structure to his days. Mrs. Henderson continued to order the tuna melt that she never quite finished, more interested in the social interaction than the food. New faces appeared occasionally, travelers passing through, relatives visiting family, but mostly Sarah served the same people day after day, year after year. She had developed genuine affection for her regulars, learning their preferences, their stories, the small dramas and celebrations that marked their lives. When Tom Bradley's grandson graduated from high school, Sarah made sure his coffee was extra hot and his pie extra large. When Mary Sue Johnson's arthritis was acting up, Sarah quietly moved her to a booth with more comfortable seating without making a fuss about it. These small acts of consideration were as natural to Sarah as breathing. She had learned from her grandmother that kindness wasn't about grand gestures but about paying attention, about noticing what people needed and providing it when possible. It was about treating each person who walked through the door as if they mattered because they did. The diner itself had become more than just a workplace to Sarah. It was a community center, a place where people connected with each other in an increasingly disconnected world. She had witnessed proposals and breakups, celebrated promotions and mourned losses, served as informal counselor and occasional confessor to people who needed someone to listen without judgment. On slow afternoons, when the lunch rush had ended and the dinner crowd hadn't yet arrived, Sarah sometimes stood by the window and watched life unfold on Main Street. She saw the same retired farmers gathering at the hardware store to discuss weather and politics, the same mothers pushing strollers and chasing toddlers, the same teenagers looking for something to do in a town that offered limited options for entertainment. Sometimes she wondered what life might have been like if Michael hadn't died, if they had been able to follow their dreams of maybe opening their own restaurant or traveling to places beyond Nebraska's borders. But she had learned not to dwell on alternative histories. The life she had was the life she lived, and there was beauty and meaning to be found in it if she chose to look. Emma was thriving despite, or perhaps because of, their modest circumstances. She was at the top of her class academically, had friends who genuinely cared about her, and possessed a natural empathy that made her beloved by teachers and classmates alike. She helped elderly Mrs. Patterson carry groceries up the stairs to their apartment building, spent Saturday mornings reading to younger children at the library, and saved her allowance to buy dog food for the animal shelter. Where does she get that generous heart? Mabel had asked one afternoon, watching through the diner window as Emma shared her lunch with a stray cat that had been hanging around the alley. Her father, Sarah had replied without hesitation. Michael always said that the purpose of life was to leave the world a little better than you found it. I think Emma inherited that belief along with his eyes. Spring turned toward summer and Sarah began making plans for Emma's school break. Money was still tight, but she had managed to save enough for a few small adventures. Day trips to the zoo in Lincoln, afternoons at the community pool, maybe a camping trip to one of the state parks. Emma was easy to please, finding wonder in simple pleasures and never complaining about what they couldn't afford. It was on a Tuesday morning in early June, 3 months and 2 weeks after that rainy evening encounter, that Sarah's life took a turn that would have seemed impossible in any reasonable universe. She was serving coffee to the morning regulars, listening to Frank Turner's daily weather report. Gonna be hot today, mark my words, hot as blazes. When she heard an unusual sound that made her pause with the coffee pot suspended in midair. It was the sound of jet engines, low and powerful, approaching from the south. Cedar Falls was nowhere near any major airport, and the small municipal airstrip typically accommodated only crop dusters, the occasional private plane, and the vintage aircraft that flew in for the annual air show each September. "What in tarnation is that noise?" Frank muttered, craning his neck to look out the window. The sound grew louder, more distinct, causing several other customers to abandon their conversations and move toward the windows. Sarah continued pouring coffee, only mildly curious about whatever aircraft was approaching. Living in agricultural country, she was accustomed to various flying machines appearing overhead. Emergency medical helicopters, government aircraft checking on crop conditions, wealthy farmers who had invested in private planes. But this sound was different, bigger, more powerful than anything that typically visited their small corner of Nebraska. Mabel emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron, her expression puzzled. "Sarah, honey," she said. And there was something strange in her voice, a mixture of excitement and confusion that Sarah had never heard before. "There's a man outside asking for you specifically. Says he knows you." Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Asking for me? Are you sure?" "Used your name and everything," Mabel confirmed. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, clear as day. Sarah looked around the diner, trying to think of who might be looking for her at work. Emma's teacher occasionally stopped by to discuss school projects, and the landlord sometimes tracked her down about apartment maintenance, but neither would generate the kind of excitement she was hearing in Mabel's voice. "What does he look like?" Sarah asked, setting down the coffee pot. Mabel glanced toward the front of the diner, then back at Sarah with an expression that bordered on bewilderment. "Well, that's the peculiar thing, honey. He's dressed like he owns half the state of Nebraska. Expensive. Suit, fancy shoes, the kind of clothes you see in magazines. Got people with him too, official-looking folks in business attire." Sarah's heart began to beat faster, though she couldn't have explained why. "Official-looking people?" "3 of them, plus the man asking for you," Mabel continued. "And Sarah, there's something familiar about him, but I can't quite place it. Like I've seen him before, but not looking like he looks now." The jet engines were winding down now, their sound fading to a low rumble before stopping entirely. Sarah moved toward the front window, her pulse quickening with each step. Through the glass, she could see across Main Street to the small airstrip, where a sleek white aircraft sat gleaming in the morning sunlight. It was larger and more luxurious than anything she had ever seen up close. A Gulfstream, she thought, though her knowledge of private jets was limited to what she'd seen in movies. Black SUV was parked near the aircraft, and several people in business attire stood beside it. But it was the man in the center of the group that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat, that made her hand fly to her chest as if to slow her suddenly racing heart. Even at a distance, even in an impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, even with his silver hair professionally styled and his bearing confident and commanding, she recognized him. It was impossible. It was absurd. It defied every reasonable explanation she could construct, but it was him, the man from the rain, the stranger in rags who had eaten meatloaf at her table and accepted her last $20 with gratitude and dignity. The person she had worried about on cold nights, wondering if he had found shelter, if he was safe, if her small act of kindness had made any difference in his difficult circumstances. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above, the sudden ringing in her ears. "You know him?" Mabel asked, moving to stand beside her at the window. Sarah couldn't answer, couldn't speak, could barely breathe as she watched the impossible scene unfolding across the street. The man was surrounded by people who were clearly assistants or advisors, their body language suggesting deference and respect. He moved with an authority that spoke of power and influence, his gestures confident as he pointed toward the diner and spoke to his companions. This couldn't be the same person. It couldn't be. But as she watched, he turned toward the diner window, and even across the distance of Main Street, even through the reflection-distorted glass, their eyes met. He raised his hand in a small wave, and his smile was unmistakable. The Same profound, kind expression he had given her that rainy night 3 months ago. The bell above the diner door chimed with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent restaurant. Every conversation had stopped. Every customer had turned to watch as the man entered, followed by two people who were obviously professionals of some sort. One was an elegantly dressed woman with kind eyes and perfectly styled gray hair. The other a younger man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. The entire diner held its breath as he approached Sarah, who stood frozen behind the counter, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing, what it might mean, how the laws of probability and reason could possibly account for this moment. "Hello, Sarah," he said, and his voice was exactly the same, warm, intelligent, genuinely kind. But now it carried an unmistakable note of authority, of someone accustomed to being listened to and respected. "I told you that night that kindness always comes around. I meant it." Sarah stared at the man standing before her, her mind reeling as she tried to reconcile the figure in the expensive suit with the memory of the bedraggled stranger who had sat in her corner booth 3 months earlier. Every detail was wrong and right simultaneously. The clothes were different, the bearing was different, but the eyes were unmistakably the same. Kind, intelligent, and now filled with something that looked almost like joy. I can't," Sarah began, then stopped, her voice failing her entirely. The man's smile widened and he gestured to his companions. "Allow me to introduce my colleagues. This is Margaret Chen, the head of corporate philanthropy for my company, and this is James Torres, my personal attorney. They've been helping me locate you, Sarah, and I have to say it's been quite a search." Margaret stepped forward with a warm smile, extending her hand to Sarah. "Ms. Mitchell, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Mr. Ashworth has told us so much about you." "Mr. Ashworth?" Sarah repeated weakly, shaking Margaret's hand automatically while her brain struggled to catch up with the situation. "Richard Ashworth," the man said, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone. "I'm afraid I wasn't entirely honest with you about my circumstances when we met." Sarah's legs suddenly felt unsteady. Richard Ashworth. The name was familiar. Not personally familiar, but culturally familiar in the way that certain names become part of the collective consciousness. She had seen it in newspapers, heard it on television news programs, read it on the covers of business magazines at the grocery store checkout. Richard Ashworth was one of the wealthiest men in America, the founder and CEO of Ashworth Industries, a technology conglomerate that had started with renewable energy solutions and expanded into medical devices, telecommunications, and artificial intelligence research. His company employed thousands of people worldwide and was worth billions of dollars. He was regularly featured on lists of the most influential philanthropists in the country, known for his innovative approaches to solving social problems and his commitment to using business as a force for positive change. And 3 months ago he had been sitting in her diner, wearing rags and gratefully accepting $20 from a waitress who couldn't afford to give it. "But you were—" Sarah started, then stopped, unable to articulate the impossibility of the situation. "Homeless? Destitute? Down on my luck?" Richard's eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. "Not exactly, though I understand why you would think so. Every year, Sarah, I spend 2 weeks living on the streets in different cities across America, not as a publicity stunt or a social experiment, but as a reminder." He paused, looking around the diner at the faces of customers, who were listening with rapt attention to every word. When you build a company from nothing, when you achieve a certain level of success, it becomes easy to lose touch with the struggles that most people face every day. Boardrooms and executive suites can become echo chambers where everyone agrees with you, where the harsh realities of poverty and desperation become abstract concepts rather than lived experiences. Sarah found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You were testing me?" "No," Richard said immediately, his tone firm and serious. "Never testing. I was simply trying to understand, to remember, to stay connected to the humanity that should drive everything we do in business. I've spent those 2 weeks each year for the past 15 years, Sarah, and in all that time, I have encountered thousands of people. I've been ignored, cursed at, sometimes helped grudgingly or with obvious reluctance." He stepped closer, and Sarah could see the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine emotion that colored his voice. But never in 15 years, have I encountered someone who gave with such pure generosity, who treated me with such dignity, who shared what little they had without expecting anything in return. You didn't just give me money, Sarah. You gave me respect. You gave me hope. You reminded me why I do what I do. Sarah felt tears beginning to gather in her eyes. Around them, the diner was completely silent except for the soft sound of Margaret opening what appeared to be a leather portfolio. You gave me $20 when you had 23 total, Richard continued, his voice growing stronger with emotion. You gave me a meal when you were struggling to feed your own family. You treated me like a human being when the world had taught me to expect contempt or pity. It was just the right thing to do, Sarah managed to say, echoing the words she had spoken that night. Yes, Richard said softly. It was, and now I want to do the right thing. James, the attorney, stepped forward and placed his briefcase on the nearest table, opening it with precise movements. The sound of the latches clicking seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed diner. Sarah, Richard said, I've spent the past 3 months learning about your life, your circumstances, your dreams. Not invasively, not intrusively, but thoroughly, enough to understand what true kindness looks like when it's lived every single day. Margaret approached with the leather portfolio, her expression warm and encouraging. Ms. Mitchell, what Mr. Ashworth is about to offer you isn't charity. It's an investment. An investment in the kind of person who makes the world better simply by being in it. Sarah looked between them, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the diner could hear it. I don't understand what's happening. Let me explain, Richard said gently. He reached into the portfolio Margaret held and withdrew a document, handing it to Sarah with careful ceremony. This is a full scholarship to the University of Nebraska, Sarah. Any degree program you choose. Full tuition, books, housing allowance, living expenses for both you and Emma. Everything covered for as long as it takes you to complete your education. Sarah stared at the document in her trembling hands, the words swimming on the page as tears began to blur her vision. I can't. This isn't real. It's real, Margaret said softly. And there's more. James withdrew another set of documents from his briefcase, his movements formal and precise. Ms. Mitchell, this is the deed to a house, a real house with a yard for Emma to play in, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms in the best school district in Lincoln. It's been purchased outright and transferred to your name. No mortgage, no monthly payments, just a home that belongs to you and Emma forever. Sarah's knees buckled, and she had to grip the edge of the counter to remain standing. The entire diner seemed to be spinning around her, and she could hear gasps and murmurs from the customers who were witnessing this impossible scene. There's also this, Margaret said gently, withdrawing yet another document. A trust fund for Emma's education, college, graduate school. Whatever path her brilliant mind chooses to follow, she'll never have to worry about student loans or choosing between her dreams and financial reality. Stop, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. Please stop. This can't be happening. Things like this don't happen to people like me. Richard stepped closer, his expression infinitely gentle. Sarah, look at me. She raised her tear-filled eyes to meet his, and in them she saw not the powerful CEO that the world knew, but the man who had sat quietly in her corner booth, grateful for warmth and kindness on a cold, rainy night. Things like this happen when someone plants seeds of kindness without expecting a harvest, he said softly. They happen when someone treats a stranger with dignity and compassion. They happen because the universe has a way of rewarding those who give from the heart. The diner erupted in spontaneous applause, but Sarah barely heard it. She was thinking about Emma, about the dreams she'd had to set aside, about the nights she'd lain awake wondering how she would manage to give her daughter the opportunities she deserved. But wait, Richard said, raising his hand for quiet. And the diner fell silent again. I'm not finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a final envelope, this one sealed with his company's logo embossed in gold. Sarah, I'm starting a new foundation. the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Single Parent Support. Its mission is to help single mothers and fathers achieve economic stability and pursue their dreams while providing the best possible lives for their children. The foundation will offer scholarships, housing assistance, childcare support, job training, and mentorship programs. Sarah's mouth fell open as the implications of what he was saying began to sink in. I need someone to run this foundation, Richard continued, his voice growing stronger with enthusiasm. Someone who understands the struggles, who has lived them, who has the heart and wisdom to truly help others. The position comes with a salary of $120,000 annually, full benefits, and the resources to change thousands of lives. He extended the envelope toward her. This is a job offer, Sarah, not charity but employment. You would be the executive director of a foundation that will operate with an initial endowment of $50 million, with the goal of expanding nationwide within 5 years. Sarah stared at the envelope as if it might burst into flames. You want me to run a foundation? But I'm just a waitress. I don't have experience with... You have the most important experience of all, Richard interrupted gently. You've walked the path. You know what it feels like to choose between rent and groceries, to lie awake at night worrying about your child's future, to maintain dignity and hope in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances. That knowledge is worth more than any MBA or corporate experience. Margaret stepped forward again. We would provide you with training, support staff, and all the resources you need to succeed. But the heart of the foundation, the understanding of what families really need, that comes from you, Sarah. That comes from your lived experience and your natural compassion. Sarah looked around the diner, at the faces of people she had served for 6 years, people who had become family. Frank Turner was wiping tears from his weathered cheeks. Mrs. Henderson was clutching her purse to her chest, her eyes wide with wonder. Even Mabel had emerged from the kitchen, her flour-dusted apron and amazed expression making her look like a character from a fairy tale. Why? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Why me? You could help anyone. You could choose someone with credentials, with education, with experience. Richard smiled, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away from his face. Do you remember what you told me that night? About how we're all just people trying to get by? About how today you can help, tomorrow you might need help? Sarah nodded, remembering. You said your grandmother taught you that kindness is like seeds. You plant them not knowing if they'll grow, but trusting that somehow they'll make the world better. Richard's voice was soft with emotion. Sarah, you planted a seed that night. Not just in helping me, but in reminding me what true generosity looks like. Now I want to help you plant seeds on a scale you never imagined. He gestured toward the documents that James and Margaret still held. This isn't just about rewarding your kindness, though you deserve every bit of this and more. This is about recognizing potential, about investing in someone who has already proven that they understand what matters most in life. Sarah felt overwhelmed, drowning in possibilities she had never dared to imagine. I need to think. I need time to... Of course, Richard said immediately. Take all the time you need. The foundation won't launch for another 6 months, which gives you time to finish any degree program you choose, to prepare, to decide if this is truly what you want. He paused, his expression growing more serious. But Sarah, I want you to know something. In 30 years of business and 15 years of these annual experiences on the streets, I have never met anyone who impressed me more than you did that night. Your kindness wasn't calculated or performed. It came from a place of genuine care for another human being. Margaret stepped forward with a warm smile. We've also established a separate fund to ensure that during your transition, whether you decide to accept the foundation position or pursue another path, you'll never have to worry about basic necessities again. Your apartment rent is covered for the next year, Emma's school expenses are handled, and there's a monthly allowance to ensure you can focus on your education and your daughter without financial stress. Sarah felt the tears flowing freely now, and she made no attempt to stop them. Around her, the diner customers were crying too, sharing in her joy and amazement. This was Cedar Falls at its best, a community that celebrated each other's victories and supported each other through struggles. I don't know what to say. Sarah managed through her tears. Say you'll accept, called out Frank Turner from his corner booth. Say you'll take this chance and show the world what Cedar Falls is made of. The diner erupted in agreement, with customers calling out encouragement and support. But Sarah's attention was focused entirely on Richard, on the man who had somehow seen potential in a struggling waitress and decided to change her life. There's one more thing, Richard said, reaching into his wallet. He withdrew a familiar $20 bill, the same one Sarah had given him 3 months earlier, now carefully preserved between plastic sleeves. I've carried this with me every day since that night. It's reminded me that the most valuable gifts aren't measured in dollars but in the spirit with which they're given. He held the bill toward her. I want you to have this back, Sarah. Keep it as a reminder that your kindness started something bigger than either of us could have imagined. Sarah took the $20 bill with trembling fingers, remembering that rainy night, remembering the decision that had seemed so small at the time. I can't believe this is real. It's real, Richard assured her. And Sarah, this is just the beginning. The foundation will help thousands of families, but it will also serve as a model for other communities, other states. Your compassion, multiplied and sustained, will create ripples of positive change that will reach further than you can imagine. Margaret opened her portfolio one final time and withdrew a glossy brochure. We've taken the liberty of creating some preliminary materials about the Foundation's mission and programs. Everything, of course, subject to your input and approval as executive director. Sarah looked at the brochure, seeing her name prominently featured alongside photographs of families that could have been her and Emma just months earlier. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Single-Parent Support. It seemed impossible that her name could be associated with something so significant, so hopeful. What about Emma? Sarah asked suddenly, her maternal instincts overriding her amazement. The house, the schools, what will this mean for her? Richard's smile widened. Emma will attend one of the best school districts in Nebraska, with access to advanced programs, arts education, and preparation for whatever college she chooses to attend. The house has a large backyard where she can finally have the dog she's been wanting, and there's an excellent veterinary science program at the university for when she's ready to pursue her dreams. You know about her wanting to be a veterinarian? Sarah asked in surprise. I know quite a bit about both of you, Richard admitted. Not from intrusion, but from admiration. I wanted to understand the kind of person who could show such kindness, the kind of family that could raise a daughter who shares her lunch with stray cats and reads to younger children at the library. Sarah felt fresh tears starting. You investigated us? I learned about you, Richard corrected gently. The same way you learn about a company before making an investment. Except in this case, I was investing in something far more valuable than stock or real estate. I was investing in character and proven compassion, in the kind of leadership that will make this foundation successful. The diner had grown quiet again, with everyone listening intently to this extraordinary conversation. Sarah looked around, at the faces of people who had been part of her daily life for 6 years, people who had supported her through the hardest times and celebrated the smallest victories. What about Mabel's? She asked suddenly. What about my job here? These people, their family. Mabel stepped forward from behind the counter, her eyes bright with tears and pride. Honey, you think we'd want to hold you back from something like this? You think we'd want to keep you waiting tables when you could be out there changing the world? But the diner, we'll be fine, Mabel said firmly. I've been running this place for 40 years, and I'll keep running it until the good Lord calls me home. But you've got bigger things to do now, bigger dreams to chase. Frank Turner stood up from his corner booth, his coffee cup in his weathered hands. Sarah, girl, you've been taking care of this whole town for years now, making sure we're fed, listening to our problems, treating us like family when some of us don't have much family left. Now it's time for you to take care of yourself and that beautiful daughter of yours. And time for you to take care of other families like yours used to be, added Mrs. Henderson. Families that need someone who understands, someone who's been where they are. Sarah looked at Richard, then at Margaret and James, then at the documents that represented a complete transformation of her life. The magnitude of what was being offered was almost too large to comprehend. "I need to ask you something," she said to Richard. "This foundation, will it really help people? Will it make a real difference? Or is it just another charity that makes wealthy people feel good about themselves?" Richard's expression grew serious, and Sarah saw a flash of the intensity she remembered from that night in the diner. "Sarah, I've spent the last 20 years of my life trying to use business as a force for good in the world. I've built schools, funded medical research, created job training programs, and supported environmental initiatives. But all of that has been done from a distance, through other organizations, with other people's expertise." He gestured toward the documents. "This foundation would be different. It would be personal. It would be led by someone who has lived the struggles we're trying to address, someone who understands intimately what families need to not just survive, but thrive." Margaret stepped forward. "Ms. Mitchell, we've spent months researching best practices in poverty alleviation and family support services. The most successful programs are always led by people who have lived experience combined with genuine compassion. You have both. Plus," James added with a slight smile, "Mr. Ashworth has committed to providing whatever resources are necessary to make this foundation the most effective single-parent support organization in the country. This isn't a small pilot program. This is a major initiative with the potential to change thousands of lives." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened in the past hour. When she opened them again, she found Richard watching her with patient understanding. "Can I ask you one more question?" she said. "Anything. That night, were you really hungry? Really cold? Or was it all just part of the experience?" Richard's expression grew thoughtful. "I was genuinely hungry, Sarah. When you spend 2 weeks living on the streets eating only what you can buy with the money people give you or find in dumpsters, hunger becomes very real. I was genuinely cold. Those clothes were the only clothes I had during those 2 weeks, and Nebraska in February is brutally cold for someone without proper shelter." He paused, his voice growing softer. "But more than hunger or cold, I was lonely, invisible, treated like a problem to be avoided rather than a person deserving of basic dignity. Until I walked into your diner and you welcomed me like I mattered." Sarah felt her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. "You did matter. You do matter. That's what you taught me that night," Richard said. "That's what you teach everyone who encounters your kindness. And that's why I know beyond any doubt that you're the right person to lead this foundation." Sarah looked down at the documents in her hands, at the $20 bill that had somehow changed the course of her entire life, at the faces of people who loved her and wanted the best for her future. "Okay," she said quietly, then louder. "Okay, yes, I'll do it." The diner exploded in cheers and applause. Mabel rushed around the counter to embrace Sarah, tears streaming down both their faces. Frank Turner raised his coffee cup in a toast, and Mrs. Henderson clapped her hands together with pure joy. But through all the celebration, Sarah's attention remained focused on Richard, on the man who had seen something in her that she had never seen in herself. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing the words were inadequate but meaning them with every fiber of her being. "Thank you," Richard replied, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for reminding me why I do what I do. Thank you for showing me what true generosity looks like. Thank you for being the kind of person who gives hope to cynics like me." The weeks that followed passed in a blur of paperwork, planning, sessions, and moments of surreal disbelief. Sarah would find herself in the middle of ordinary tasks, folding laundry, helping Emma with homework, restocking napkin dispensers at the diner, when the reality of her changed circumstances would hit her like a wave. She was going to college. At 32, after years of believing that ship had sailed, she was going to pursue the education she had dreamed of as a teenager. The University of Nebraska had welcomed her with enthusiasm, and after several meetings with academic advisors, she had decided to pursue a degree in social work with a focus on family services and nonprofit management. "Mama, are you scared?" Emma had asked one evening as they sat together on their small couch looking through the university course catalog. "Terrified," Sarah had admitted honestly. but also excited. Sometimes the best things in life are scary because they matter so much. Emma had nodded solemnly, her 9-year-old wisdom shining through. Like when I was scared to try out for the school play but did it anyway? Exactly like that, Sarah had agreed, marveling at her daughter's ability to understand complex emotions. The house, their house, was everything Richard had promised and more. Located in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and sidewalks where children rode bicycles and neighbors waved to each other, it represented stability and possibilities that Sarah had never dared to imagine. Emma's bedroom had built-in bookshelves and a window seat where she could read while looking out at their own backyard. Sarah's room had space for a desk where she could study, and there was even a small office that could serve as her workspace when she began her duties with the foundation. "It's really ours?" Emma had whispered when they first walked through the front door, her voice filled with wonder. "It's really ours," Sarah had confirmed, her own voice choked with emotion. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Sarah had never owned anything more valuable than her 15-year-old Honda Civic, and suddenly she was responsible for property taxes, homeowners insurance, and maintenance decisions. Margaret Chen had connected her with a team of professionals, accountants, lawyers, financial advisors, who helped navigate the practical aspects of her new circumstances. The most important thing, Margaret had explained during one of their planning sessions, is to remember that this is not a temporary gift that might be taken away. This is your new reality, Sarah. You've earned it, and now you need to embrace it fully. Learning to embrace abundance after years of scarcity proved more difficult than Sarah had anticipated. She found herself checking price tags obsessively at the grocery store, even though money was no longer a concern. She apologized to restaurant servers when Emma ordered something expensive. She felt guilty about the beautiful clothes that Margaret had helped her select for foundation meetings and university classes. "It's normal," Richard had assured her during one of their regular planning meetings. "I went through something similar when my company first became successful. Abundance guilt is real, but you have to remember that your comfort and security aren't taking anything away from anyone else. In fact, they're enabling you to help more people than you ever could before." The Ciudad Foundation was taking shape with remarkable speed. Richard's team had secured office space in Lincoln, not far from the university campus, and was in the process of hiring support staff. Sarah would officially begin her role as executive director in January, after completing her first semester of coursework, but she was already deeply involved in program development and strategic planning. "What I want to understand," she had said during one planning session, "is how we're going to reach the families who need help most. The people I would have been helping 6 months ago. They're not reading foundation websites or attending community meetings. They're working double shifts and trying to keep their heads above water." "That's exactly why we need you," Margaret had replied. "You know where those families are, what their days look like, what kind of support would actually make a difference in their lives." Sarah had proposed partnerships with diners, laundromats, grocery stores, and other places where struggling families spent time. "We need to meet people where they are," she had argued, "not expect them to come to us." Her insight had impressed the entire planning team, and several of her suggestions had been incorporated into the foundation's outreach strategy. The experience of being listened to, of having her ideas valued and implemented, was as transformative as the financial security she had gained. Emma was thriving in their new circumstances, but she remained essentially the same thoughtful, generous child she had always been. Her new school offered advanced programs that challenged her academically, and she had made friends quickly. But she still insisted on volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends, and she had started a book drive at school to collect reading materials for children whose families couldn't afford to buy books. "She's remarkable," her new teacher had told Sarah during a parent conference. "Academically gifted, certainly, but more than that. She has such empathy for others. She's the first to help a struggling classmate or include someone who's being left out. She gets that from her father," Sarah had replied, as she always did when people praised Emma's character. But privately, she was beginning to understand that Emma's compassion also reflected the environment in which she had been raised. Years of watching her mother show kindness to strangers, of understanding that dignity and respect were given freely regardless of someone's circumstances, had shaped Emma's worldview in profound ways. The media attention that followed the story of Richard's revelation had been intense but generally positive. Local news stations had covered the story, and it had eventually been picked up by national outlets. Sarah had been approached by several talk shows and magazines, but she had declined most interviews, preferring to focus on her studies and foundation preparation rather than publicity. "I'm not doing this to be famous," she had explained to Richard when he asked about her decision to avoid the spotlight. "I'm doing this to help families. The attention should be on the work, not on me." "That attitude," Richard had replied with a smile, "is exactly why I knew you were the right person for this job." The one interview Sarah had agreed to was with the local newspaper, because she wanted the people of Cedar Falls to understand that she hadn't forgotten her roots, that the foundation would always maintain connections to small-town communities like theirs. "Success isn't about leaving your past behind," she had told the reporter. "It's about using your experiences, all of them, including the struggles, to build something better for the future." As autumn turned to winter, Sarah settled into a routine that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. 3 days a week, she attended classes at the university, studying subjects that fascinated her and challenging herself intellectually in ways she hadn't since high school. 2 days a week, she worked at the foundation offices, developing programs and preparing for her official role as executive director. Her professors were impressed by her dedication and the real-world perspective she brought to classroom discussions about poverty, family dynamics, and social services. Her fellow students, initially intimidated by her media attention, had come to appreciate her warmth and willingness to share her experiences. "You make everything more real," one classmate had told her after a particularly intense discussion about the challenges facing single parents. "When you talk about choosing between rent and groceries, we understand that these aren't just statistics. These are real families with real struggles." The foundation's launch was scheduled for January, and Sarah had spent months working with Margaret and the team to develop programs that would provide comprehensive support to single-parent families. In addition to financial assistance and housing support, the foundation would offer childcare services, job training programs, educational scholarships, and mentorship opportunities. "What sets us apart," Sarah had explained to a group of potential donors, "is that we understand the interconnected nature of these challenges. It's not enough to just provide housing assistance if someone doesn't have reliable transportation to get to work. It's not enough to offer job training if someone can't find affordable childcare during the program." Her presentation had been met with enthusiastic support, and several major donors had committed significant funding to the foundation's programs. Sarah's ability to articulate the complexities of poverty from personal experience, combined with her genuine passion for helping others, had proven to be a powerful combination. Emma had attended some of the foundation meetings, and her presence had added an important dimension to the discussions. When board members talked about the challenges facing children in single-parent homes, Emma's bright, confident demeanor served as a reminder that these children could thrive with the right support. "I want to help too," Emma had announced during one meeting. "When I'm older, I want to work with the foundation and help other kids whose moms and dads are working really hard." "What kind of help do you think kids need most?" Margaret had asked, genuinely curious about Emma's perspective. Emma had thought carefully before answering. "I think they need to know that being poor doesn't mean they're not smart, and being different doesn't mean they don't belong. And they need to know that someone believes in them, even when things are hard." Her words had brought tears to several eyes around the conference table, and Sarah had felt a surge of pride in her daughter's wisdom and compassion. December brought an unexpected surprise. Richard had arranged for Sarah and Emma to join him and his family for Christmas dinner, not as a business meeting but as a personal celebration. His wife, Catherine, was a warm, intelligent woman who worked as a pediatric nurse, and their 2 adult children had inherited their parents' commitment to service. Their son was a teacher in an underserved school district, and their daughter worked for Doctors Without Borders. "We wanted to meet the woman who reminded my husband why he does what he does," Catherine had said when they first met. "And we wanted to thank you for giving him back his sense of purpose." The evening had been filled with laughter, good food, and genuine connection. Emma had been shy at first, but she had quickly warmed to Richard's family, especially when she learned that his daughter had worked with animals in several African countries as part of her medical missions. "You know," Richard had said as they sat by the fireplace after dinner, watching Emma play with the family's golden retriever, "when I walked into your diner that night, I was questioning whether kindness still existed in the world. I'd seen so much indifference, so much casual cruelty, that I was beginning to lose faith in human nature." "And now?" Sarah had asked. "Now I'm reminded daily that kindness not only exists but multiplies," he had replied. "The foundation has already inspired 3 other organizations to start similar programs. Your story has encouraged hundreds of people to volunteer or donate to various causes. The ripple effects of that $20 bill continue to spread." As the new year approached, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. A year ago, she had been a struggling single mother, working double shifts to make ends meet, worried about her daughter's future and her own limitations. Now she was about to become the executive director of a major foundation, pursuing a college degree, and living in a beautiful home where Emma could grow up with security and endless possibilities. But perhaps the most significant change wasn't in her circumstances. It was in her understanding of her own worth and potential. For years she had seen herself as someone life happened to, someone who reacted to challenges rather than creating opportunities. Now she was beginning to see herself as someone who could shape not only her own future, but the futures of countless other families. "Mama," Emma had said one evening as they sat together in their living room, Sarah studying for finals while Emma worked on a science project about marine life, "do you ever think about that man you helped at the diner?" "Every day," Sarah had replied honestly. "Do you think he knew when you gave him that money that he was going to help us?" Sarah had considered the question carefully. "I think he hoped he would be able to help someone someday, but I don't think he knew it would be us specifically." Emma had nodded thoughtfully. "It's like planting seeds, like you always say. You don't know exactly what will grow, but you know something good will happen." "Exactly like that, sweetheart. I want to plant seeds too," Emma had declared. "With the foundation, and with being a veterinarian, and just by being kind to people." Sarah had looked at her daughter, brilliant, compassionate, full of dreams and determination, and had felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. The man in rags who had become a man in a private jet had changed their circumstances, but Emma's character had been shaped by years of watching her mother choose kindness over bitterness, generosity over self-protection, hope over despair. 2023 drew to a close. Sarah prepared for the official launch of the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Single-Parent Support. The office space was ready, the staff had been hired, and the first group of families had been selected to participate in the pilot programs. Everything was in place for what Richard believed could become a model for addressing family poverty across the United States. But for Sarah, the most important measure of the foundation's success wouldn't be found in statistics or media coverage. It would be found in the moments when a struggling parent realized that someone understood their challenges, when a child discovered that their circumstances didn't define their potential, when a family moved from survival mode to building a future filled with possibilities. The night before the foundation's official launch, Sarah sat in her home office, looking over the materials they would be distributing to their first client families. Among the paperwork was a framed copy of the original $20 bill, the one that had started this incredible journey. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, well-meaning, but limited in her ability to help others, constrained by her own circumstances, dreaming of making a difference but not knowing how. Now she was about to lead an organization with the resources and vision to transform thousands of lives. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Richard, calling to wish her luck before tomorrow's launch event. "Are you ready?" he asked. Sarah looked around her office at the photos of Emma on her desk, at the university textbooks that represented her continuing education, at the foundation materials that represented her new purpose in life. "I'm ready," she said, and for the first time in her life, she truly meant it. "Sarah," Richard said, his voice warm with affection and respect, "I want you to know that giving you that $20 was the best investment you ever made. But, more than that, showing kindness to a stranger was an investment in the kind of world you wanted to live in. Tomorrow, you begin multiplying that investment in ways that will touch more lives than either of us can imagine." After they hung up, Sarah returned to her preparation materials, but her mind was filled with memories of that rainy night at Mabel's diner. She had given what she could because it was the right thing to do, because her grandmother had taught her that kindness mattered, because treating others with dignity was simply how she chose to live. She had never expected kindness to return to her in such abundance. But as she prepared to begin the most important work of her life, she understood that the real reward wasn't the house or the education or even the foundation itself. The real reward was the opportunity to multiply kindness, to ensure that other families would experience the same hope and possibility that had transformed her life. Tomorrow, the Sarah Mitchell Foundation would officially open its doors. Tomorrow, the ripple effects of a $20 bill given in compassion would begin to spread across the country. Tomorrow, the woman who had once served coffee and dreams in a small-town diner would begin leading an organization dedicated to ensuring that kindness, dignity, and hope were available to every family that needed them. And in Cedar Falls, at Mabel's Diner, there would be a small plaque by the corner booth where it all began. "Kindness planted here continues to grow." A beautiful reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can ripple into something life-changing in ways we never imagine. Sarah's story shows us that generosity isn't about what we have, it's about what we're willing to share when we don't have much to begin with. What would you have done in her shoes? Tell us in the comments, and if this story moved you, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more real-life inspired stories that restore your faith in humanity and remind us that kindness always comes back, sometimes in the most extraordinary ways.